Hola, buenos días a todas.
Hello, good morning to everyone. First of all, we would like to thank the colleagues from UNAF. There has been some technical issues, but notwithstanding that, these have been key conversations and debates, and we want to thank you. We do know that organizing these kind of international meetings is not easy, and for many years they've been able to organize them, so it has been a great success on their part. We would also like to thank our colleagues from UNAF for inviting us to be part of this roundtable. I work in the strategic development and the investigation of this ASPACIA Foundation, and we work in this feminist organization fighting to prevent and eradicate gender-based violence, specifically sexual gender-based violence. We've been working, managing the specific centers that offer comprehensive care to sexual violence, gender-based violence cases, and we work in cooperation with other associations, including, amongst others, UNAF. So, without further ado, I hope that we will be able to give a response to this question, this challenge, to policy frameworks both in Spain and the European Union actually respond to the women's need. This is a question that will lead to a debate, but also a possibility of assessing the challenges, the successes, and the failures, so that we could help to improve the quality of women in general, but in particular, the survivors of the female genital mutilation. I don't know if Françoise is already with us. I hope so. Can you hear us?
Ahí está, Françoise.
Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you, Françoise.
Hola.
Hello.
Espero que se me oiga.
I hope you can listen to me. I haven't been able to listen to you, but I imagine you mentioned something. It's all good. As long as you can hear me, I see on the chat that you can, so that's all good. So good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this meeting. It has been so far incredibly interesting. My name is Françoise Kempf, and I work in the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. We're not part of the European Union. We are part of the Council of Europe, which is an organization that defends the human rights in Europe. And we've been working since 1949 in this area, and this is precisely the headquarters of the Human Rights Court, European Court. This is an organization where we signed the Istanbul Convention to fight gender-based violence and home violence, and I work precisely in the department that assesses the application of this convention. So I prepare a presentation in English, and my PowerPoint was in English, but I'm going to leave it aside because I'm going to try to do it in Spanish due to the technical issues. I hope it's okay. If there's anything that doesn't come out quite clear, just let me know. So what I wanted to tell you today is to give you a broad general idea about what the Istanbul Convention is, and of course, paying specific attention on female genital mutilation and what the convention has to say about that. So this is the instrument used by the international community to defend and prevent violence against women and domestic violence. This is the most comprehensive convention. It was signed 10 years. It's our 10th anniversary this year. It started to be applied in 2014, and it has been ratified by 39 member states of the Council of Europe. So, interesting number of countries have already signed it. Now, in terms of what is due, a lot of new countries are joinees. 3 new ones have ratified it in January, 1 Latvia. And even more interesting than all that is that from last year, the European Union, as a union, as an institution, is also has signed the convention and is a member of the convention itself. So this is a broad general information, as I mentioned, but I wanted to mention that this convention is open So other countries that are not members of the Council of Europe can also join. Unfortunately, we have not yet any country that is a non-European country ratifying the convention, but we hope it will happen. And if we have to go into detail about the female mutilation, genital mutilation, there are some main ideas that are key for us. So, first of all, we consider that any violence against women is gender-based violence, precisely because women suffer that violence just because of the fact that they're women. And the convention also states that it is the cause and the consequence of the gender inequalities between men and women. And due to that, this convention has required not only the need to fight this, but also to fight the discrimination, inequality, and stereotypes that damage the role of women in society. So aside from all that, we have another important principle that says that all of the help and the support that we can offer the victims and survivors should be always focused and victim-based, in the sense that all of the activities and actions provided by the states should always have the needs of the victims at its core. And there has to be a gender perspective also. We cannot deal with these kinds of violences, the ones that are covered by the convention, without having a gender approach. And another important element is the fact that all the different elements included in the convention, this is a broad one with 60 articles in total, is that all of these have to be applied, notwithstanding, without any kind of discrimination, to all women. It doesn't matter your nationality, your language, your origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, or any possibility of disability. And, sorry, one important element here as well is you have to apply the convention, notwithstanding the potential migratory status of the woman at the time. And now, I would like to go in detail a bit more, if that's okay. So first, what are the forms of gender-based violence that are covered by the convention? First of all, physical violence, psychological violence, harassment, sexual violence, sexual harassment, forced marriage, abortion and forced abortion and sterilization of women. Of course, female genital mutilation, and it also forbids punishment due to, quote, honor, unquote. So all these different member states should prevent and act against all these violence. And now regarding female genital mutilation, there is a specific article in the convention that requires the member states to make all the legal measures necessary to make illegal the female genital mutilation, and the definition includes all the different types. I don't know if in Spanish you have a specific all of these, but we have both the excision, the infibulation, and all the different options, including the clitoridectomy, the partial or total removal of the clitoris and the labia, and the narrowing of the vaginal orifice. So the convention wants legal measures to prevent prevent women to be forced to undergo this female genital mutilation, as well as to prevent any girls suffer this procedure. So, sorry, Spanish is not my first language, so I hope you understand that to incite, to promote, or to force women, and specifically girls, to undergo this type of violence has also to be completely illegal and face legal punishment. And we have been trying to make it quite clear through the convention the different types of mutilation, but we now have this to promote and to force this. We want this to be criminalized as well. And now, even going deeper and further in detail, the convention has been based on comprehensive policies, prevention, protection, and prosecution, the 4 Ps. Can we say prosecution in Spanish? I'm not sure, but you know what I mean. Because I'm going to try to explain to you what these 4 Ps mean and what are we talking about specifically in the case of female genital mutilation, which is what the state should be doing regarding this topic. So first of all, the comprehensive policies. What we want the state to do is to adopt and to apply policies to prevent gender-based violence that should be comprehensive and that also should include all the types of violence that appear in the convention. This also means that all financial resources should be available for the civil society, as well as the NGOs that work in this area. Many specialized services are usually being provided by the NGOs, and in order to do so, they need to have the required resources. There's also an obligation of data collection from the policy, the healthcare services, and social services, and obligation to research gender-based violence, and specifically in female genital mutilation, we lack a lot of information in most of these states. And there's not that much information in terms of the research on the topic. Every single time that I explain the P, I'm going to give you some examples of positive practices and a few examples of the challenges that we're facing. And that will continue. So as I said, in the last 10 years, is that many states have adopted and applied comprehensive national plans against gender violence, and they are based on the principles of the convention, which is good. There are a few states that have specific protocols and policies to fight against female genital mutilation, like for example in Italy, Portugal, the Netherlands, or France, among others. And then there are other countries that are collecting specific data on female genital mutilation, like for example Sweden. But we can also see that in general, even if they include this female genital mutilation as well as the forced marriage in these types of violences, they tend to be considered less relevant to these data collections than domestic violence. There's also the fact that in many of these European countries, we lack the consideration, to take into consideration the specific vulnerabilities on women that are refugees, are migrants, or have any type of disability. So we need an intersectional approach. It tends to be included in the policies or in the laws, but in the practice, we don't see it that often. Another big challenge is the lack of adequate financial resources for NGOs, which I'm pretty sure is the case in Spain, just as in many other states. And as I mentioned, the lack of adequate data collection for this specific topic. Now, the second P was prevention. I'm not going to give you that many details because I think this morning this has already been talked about. We've been talking about prevention so far. The main objective of the Istanbul Convention is to change the minds in the long term, to change the stereotypes of the roles women play. That will prevent effectively gender-based violence. There are many dispositions, including, for example, the need to, these are obligations that the states have. And so these provisions, for example, for an awareness campaign on gender-based violence, on every single type of gender-based violence, including female genital mutilation, campaigns that talk to the general population, but also that are targeting specific groups of people. And the convention is also talking about, for example, the need to talk with boys and men, because just as has already been mentioned, it's fundamental to do so. There is a provision that has to do with education and education systems to offer the material needed to promote mutual respect, prevention of violence, and both informal and informal areas, including not only the schools, but also the sports activities and sexual education. Sexual education was not included as such in the convention, but basically what we want is to have a comprehensive sexual education. And there's another fundamental provision about the training the different professionals that play a part in the care offered not only to the victims, but also with dealing with the perpetrators. So we're talking about the police, we're talking about the judges, the doctors and nurses. We are asking to offer initial training, but also lifelong learning programs that will offer information and training on every single type of gender-based violence, including, amongst other, female genital mutilation, to allow these professionals to be able to detect, to prevent, and to care for these cases of gender-based violence. And this should be done understanding the needs of the victims. Just what has already been mentioned, the need to have an adequate awareness campaign so that we can understand the cultural differences to help these women. Now, regarding good practices, in many countries, we've seen specific campaigns, awareness campaigns for the general public, some of them targeted for the victims so that they will be more aware of the resources and the rights. And one good practice, one good example from the Netherlands has developed specific measures for parents, specifically fathers that do not want their kids to go through the female genital mutilation, but are facing the pressure from the community. As another example, we have the cultural mediators. We have already talked about that this morning here, and they can play a fundamental role in education and in healthcare services, but also They can help to work with the communities. There are a lot of examples of good practices in Switzerland and Malta. Another good example that we should mention is the European and FGM violence to prevent and eradicate female genital mutilation. But there are challenges, and what we have seen is a lack of initiatives on FGM, and in many cases these initiatives are only partial and do not happen with a certain frequency. There's not enough resources to create these constant awareness campaigns. And regarding training, well, clearly, we have to do more than just focus on female genital mutilation, but of course we have to focus on them as well. But there should be training, compulsory training for professionals, and also when there's information and when there's training, we need to add to that training the gender approach. Otherwise, there will not be enough awareness of the specific needs of these women. And that also has to do with the fact that the specific NGOs are not involved in these trainings. In many of these countries, the trainings take place without including and inviting the NGOs that actually know what they're dealing with on the field. Now, the third P, we're talking about the convention. We want the victims to receive all the support they need, and that should include protection. So that has to take place without a secondary victimization, so that they will not endure that process all over again, and it should be applied for survivors of the female genital mutilation or girls and women that are at risk of suffering it. So what we're doing is, in this part of the protection, we have a set of provisions that talk about the right of the victims to access information. We've already mentioned it this morning. Women need to have access to information on what the legal framework says, the resources available, and this is not just to share the information. The information should be translated into different languages. It should be easy to access by women with disabilities, and they should take also into consideration the different cultural sensibilities. Aside from that, there are other obligations for the general support services, that will be the healthcare services or the social services, and these will be the first line for protection of victims of gender-based violence. These professionals should be able to ask the right questions and to then send these women to that place where they will receive the support they actually need. So there are specific information for these elements. And in terms of the FGM, what we have seen in many of these countries is that healthcare services are not that aware of the situation. They have not been trained about it. And therefore, they are not able, on many occasions, they will tell you, we don't know, we have never seen any, we have no clue if there's anything. And it usually has to do with the lack of measures that help to detect what is going on. There are other obligations for the states to offer the victims specialized services, and among others, we have refugee shelters for women where they can become shelters also for women that have suffered female genital mutilation. We might have counseling services, phone services, and we also need counseling centers for supporting kids and for supporting the victims of sex violence. We need to offer this support immediately, but also in the long term, and psychological support as well. And another fundamental element is to take into consideration, both in the general perspective but the specific services, that all of this has to be coordinated. Sometimes it's not, and for that reason, they are not able to actually offer what these women need. Another of the fundamental elements here is that we need to empower women, and we should not offer a patronizing approach, because we want women to be able to prosper, to grow on their own, thanks to the different resources that they will need. Françoise, you hear me? Just one final thing about protection, even if in the convention we don't include it there, is that the convention has specific provisions for refugee or asylum seekers, and it includes the fact that states need to approach with a gender perspective when assessing these asylum-seeking applications in order to protect the gender-based violence victims throughout the process. Another thing that we saw in many of these countries is that you can get to a shelter or receive a specific subsidiary help when you are a victim of these or when you have suffered female genital mutilation. The truth is that there's a lot of obstacles for these women to actually be able to tell what has happened to them, to share their issues, and in many cases, in some of the countries, the possibilities of getting international protection status due to female genital mutilation is quite limited. Françoise, can you hear me? Great. We need to conclude. Can you please? Can you hear us? Is that we're running out of time? We can continue later on the discussion to complement the information. I cannot hear you, but okay, that's fine. I think I understood the message.
Bueno, para continuar,
So in order to continue
del ámbito europeo,
on the European, we're going from the Council of Europe to the European Union, and now we have Samara de las Heras. She has an international law PhD and an expert on women's rights and gender-based violence. So to understand a little bit more about the European Union context, to understand the different directives and provisions that protect the survivors of the FGM. We have Samara with us, and yesterday the directive on this area was approved in the European Union, so there's a lot of things that we can talk about precisely about that today.
Hola, buenos días.
Good morning.
Vale, perfecto, gracias. Pues muchas gracias, Priscila. Muchas gracias a las organizadoras
and I want to
del
thank the
evento
organizations of the associations which have organized the event and everybody that is making this meeting possible. Yesterday, of course, we came to an agreement to pass the directive And now I will tell you a little bit the process that we have had. I am a counselor member of the European Parliament, and I have information of the process. We thought at the beginning that the directive was not going to be passed, and we have had many problems and limitations in the agreement. I think that this is a good time to be happy, because this agreement has been passed and approved, and we have come to an agreement. It is precisely because of something that has to do with the question starting this table. Legal frameworks have the needs of women into account, and I think that the answer is that we are working on that we are fighting for that. But let's not forget a couple of questions that are basic now. One, legal institutions have always been a domination tool for women, to dominate women. So we cannot pretend now so that these institutions give a response to our problems now. And this has been studied by feminine legal experts for so many years. In the 80s, some people weren't asked about the laws and about the application of the laws, which are applied by a group of men, not everybody, just a group of white men who have studied law with no other training and without taking into account the realities and the needs of the rest of the groups. The second thing that I think that we have to take into account, and that's why I see that we have to be happy, is that every time we take a step forward, we come across resistance. And now we have to think about the resistances that we are going to come across. In the process of the directive has been very long. The Commission presented a first proposal 2 years ago, and the proposal was sent to other European institutions, making reviews, assessing things, etc. The report written by the European Parliament was much more progressive in comparison with the Commission's proposal. The proposal by the Council was very much restrictive in comparison with the initial proposal, and we have been debating and have come to an agreement that we didn't want at the beginning, but we are seeing positive things as well. I don't know whether you know that one of the things that is left aside in the directive is sexual rape. So for the first time, we are going to have a regulation on violence against women, which does not contemplate rape, which does not contemplate sexual violence in the member states. And I think this is something very painful for us, especially in Spain. And I say Spain because Spain is one of the countries where we have regulations to fight against different types and typology of violence against women. But you have to think that this is the European Union, where Spain and Sweden have specific regulation for violence against women, but the rest of the states do not regulate this type of issues. So if you think globally, if you think about the member states as a whole, this is good. This is positive for them, especially for the other states. Why we were not managed to regulate sexual violence from the criminal point of view? Because in the regulation, in the directive, you can see prevention and you can see the protection of women and the fact that we need special resources and prevention measures. But who are the people in the Council of Europe? White men that again reject the idea of talking about consent and the role that consent plays in violence against women, and this is something that was very challenging to come to the agreement. Another key question in the submission of women is everything that has to do with sexuality and reproduction, that we know are one of the hot topics, the strongest ideas of the control of the patriarchy. The idea of control and reproduction on sexuality is the battlefield forever. And we know that with female genital mutilation, this is precisely the case. So I wanted to speak about the positive side of the agreement as well. Because the truth is that we are starting to work in the first step of raising the awareness, naming violence against women, knowing that they exist and that we can talk about them. Among them, mutilation. Data that we have are very scarce, and I've been looking for data in the European Union portals, and they all have the same report, the report of 2020 of the Gender Institute, saying that in Europe there are 60,000 women who have suffered mutilations, and they also say that there are 180,000 girls in risk or at risk of being mutilated in Europe, and among women who are asylum seekers in Spain, there are around 20,000 coming from countries where they are at risk of being mutilated or suffering mutilation in the future. But this data do not mean much when data are not continued throughout time, when they just show a picture, like a photograph, that does not allow us to evaluate. They don't mean much. But, however, this is just the first step. The directive and the other regulations that we have foster member states to compile data, and also the European institutions have to compile data. Maybe in 10 years' time we will have another picture and we will know what the reality is. If the policies give good results, then we will see what the situation is going to be in the future, because this is just the first step. We don't know what is going to be the result, and maybe we will need to change our strategies and see whether our work is really effective or not. In the European Union environment, in the last years, there have been many regulations and rules. Françoise mentioned this idea before. In the European Union, the body which is in charge of human rights is the Council of Europe, not the European Union itself. The European Union is just the union to support financial relationships, not human rights. So it is important to move forward from the European Union, so that the European Union ratifies the Convention of Istanbul, the Istanbul Convention, because one of the fights that we have had in this process with the directive is to respect the Istanbul Convention, the minimum points and articles of the Convention. We didn't want to be farther. We just wanted to maintain minimum protection aspects in all types of violence. And we have approved many rules and many regulations, especially during the last legislation, to come to the directive proposal that we have now. This proposal has not been passed yet. We have just a previous agreement. There is the agreement to pass it now. Each of the institutions have to vote for it. The Parliament has to vote for it, and the institutions will see whether the directive is finally and definitely passed on. Once passed, the member states will have to approve and pass in their own member states specific legislations and public policies to fulfill or respect what the directive says. And this is why I say that this is a continuous fight. This is going to be a process that will take us years. This morning, I have access to the text of the agreement, and I had time coming here to review it, to confirm the main points that are related to human mutilation, and I had the opportunity to see the changes. But the text has changed just a little bit in comparison with the proposal. The battle was centered and focused on the question of sexual violence, but there has been a greater agreement in what it has to do with the different genital mutilations. And I want to reflect a little bit upon something, and then we can talk about it later if you want, but there is something that I'm really worried about. Sexual violence has been questioned. However, genital mutilation has not been that much questioned, and and it's just for you to have an idea or to know why I'm worried about this idea. Rights, extreme far rights, political parties reject to have specific types of violence against women, except when they mixture this violence with immigration and with the violence committed by the others, and I quote, the others. I am really worried about the vision that these far-right political parties may have about this genital mutilation, saying yes, okay, yes to this type of mutilation because this is committed in other countries, in countries far away from Europe, and we have to protect women who come to Spain. This is just a reflection that we can comment later, but this scope, this approach has an influence on our responses, on our response to violence. Anyway, things that I know or that I believe are positive from the proposal of the directive that I know that is going certainly to be passed. One important thing is that it talks about genital mutilation, that it is a crime that has to be regulated by the member states. And something that is going to change the Spanish legislation, which is that the directive takes into account the criminal regulation from a gender perspective, and the legislation in Spain does not do that. It mentions genital mutilations in a global way without any context, as it is something that can happen to everybody and not specific to women, as a specific way of violence against women. So the directive or the proposal is important in this regard because it's a way to execute violence and control against women, and this is reflected in the directive, and I think that this is a very important idea. Another aspect that I think is important in the directive, because in general, not just with regards to genital mutilation, but with regards to all types of violence, and this is my personal opinion, I think that we won't be able to eradicate violence against women just in a criminal context or just with the support of legislation related to crime, not just to pretend to prevent it or to protect violence. And this is not the scope or that we need to tackle the problem. I think that Françoise mentioned it also. In the directive proposal, we are giving a high value to specialized services. The directive mentions financial and staff resources that are necessary and adequate. The directive mentions that all professionals need to have a training based on law, on gender, with a cross-sectional scope. And this is part of the directive. It is incorporated in the directive, and it's okay. And I think that it will be positive because in Spain we will need a special legislation with regards to support, public support, not just a support guaranteed by NGOs, etc. We know that these type of services have to be provided by the state. We know that in Madrid everything is managed by public entities, but at least we need public services to sustain and maintain these type of services. So then the criminal regulation is also very important as well, because we will need to regulate mutilation from a criminal point of view. Last time, apart from the practice of the different types of mutilation, the directive also has taken into account, and as Françoise said, something which was part of the Istanbul Convention, which is the idea of promoting mutilation of little girls in the different countries. But, you know, moving or leaving aside the gender scope, I think it is fundamental to talk about all the measures that the directive is going to mention with regards to prevention, assistance to victims, etc. We mentioned asylum. 4 years ago, I have not been working as a lawyer for 4 years, but before I was working as a lawyer, and I remember that at that time it was very difficult to obtain asylum in Spain, not just for mutilation reasons, but for any reason that had to do with gender. So the directive needs to push up a little bit on that, and it is something that is going to change the scope of legislation in Spain and in other countries. In the Q&A, if you want, we can get deeper into some of the questions that you want. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Samara.
Thank you, Samara, for the information about the text that has been agreed upon. It is a privilege to have that information here with us today. It's a very complex process, so it's good to have that information. And we want to follow this to know the fact that rape has not been included and consent has not been included, but we have all these different types of sexual violence, and rape is one of the most extreme types of gender-based violence, but also to understand all these different, but let's talk about the reality as well, to see the response of what women are demanding or the needs that the female genital mutilation survivors have here in Spain, and to know if the legal frameworks actually take their needs into consideration, because the laws need to be made for specific women in this case, and to know if that is the case. And for that we have Sarahi Boleko. She is the representative of the assistance services in UNAF, and she's going to tell us a bit more about this experience from the point of view of UNAF, her own experience, and also as a member of the network. Thank you. I would like to explain a little bit from my presentation, to give you a bit of perspective about what the state network, the Libres of MGF, free of female genital mutilation, is been doing, and how we've been working together with activists and other associations and professionals that are dealing with the care for the FGM survivors. We've been working for years, trying as a network to create spaces full of good practices between different professions, so that we can add up all of our experiences, because we are present in the different elements of the and different levels of the state structure, and we try to have a comprehensive, holistic approach for women and girls that have survived the female genital mutilation. So I'm going to try to explain all of these legal approaches, how we are applying them, and because many of the things that have been mentioned so far by my colleagues this morning, but also because I want to show you what this national network, the Libres de MGF, free of female genital mutilation, is doing. Always providing a response to Samara's question. If we are talking about these specific legal frameworks, do we include female genital mutilation in this? Are we just punishing the deeds but not repairing the issues this kind of gender-based violence is producing, not only on the bodies of these women, but on their lives in general? So when we are talking about the different elements of this, are we only focusing on that?
todas las normas que hay, ¿no? Por eso nosotros nos
We need to focus on all the different elements, trying to understand them, trying to approach them, to understand that survivors of female genital mutilation or women that are in a vulnerable position that are facing the possibility of suffering this kind of violence here in Spain, mostly from other countries, and sometimes their legal status might play a role in what happens or how they can access resources, and how patriarchy and racism go hand in hand, separating them from these options. For that reason, we need that comprehensive approach to understand all the different elements of the realities so that we can provide a better care to the survivors. We also need to understand the approach based on the human rights and the promotion of sexual, reproductive, comprehensive health care, where they will receive the assistance and the information they need throughout their lives as women, as well as a promotion of a physical and emotional well-being for their own development, and we also work on that aspect. Now, regarding the challenges, some of them are included in my presentation, but have already been mentioned throughout the morning. For example, training the professionals, training those that will be dealing with the care to these survivors, to these women and girls that have suffered the female genital mutilation, because many of these professionals are not fully aware or they don't know what is going on, while the survivors don't know the resources available to them. So how can we understand the effects of this kind of violence in the lives of women if you don't know all the information about it, or you don't know about the initiatives provided by other entities, or that are not familiar with the specific protocol in the different autonomous communities, because there are some autonomous communities that have specific protocols, but some healthcare professionals and social workers don't know about them. And aside from that, we need institutions to help with this training. But aside from all that, we also need training in intersectional and intercultural approach to understand all kinds of gender-based violence, including, of course, the female genital mutilation, because it's fundamental. If you don't take all of these aspects into account, a lot of the professionals, as has already been mentioned, will continue promoting the stereotypes and the myths that become barriers to the access of women to the care they need and require. If you don't understand what goes on, you cannot help, and it will prevent them from understanding how to help them, but also through the intercultural mediation, which is another main challenge, is that this mediation, and to be recognized as a fundamental element, not just a translation or an interpreter of cultures, but a bridge that connects these different cultures, allowing communication to flow, and to not only focus on the conflicts for the lack of acknowledgement or understanding. What do you do in your country? What do you do in Spain? And what are the different customs in each one of these countries? But through these specific mediators, you can do that. And for that reason, today, we know that intercultural mediation, it's been guaranteed thanks to NGOs and other associations that are part of our network. And in many cases, what they have is not a lot of economical, financial resources, because they're not getting the support from the institutions that allows them to have an adequate recognition of the intercultural mediation as a profession. And we need to guarantee the possibility of getting this service to every woman that requires them. And also the possibility of being recognized as a profession, a recognition that will allow the cooperation and coordination between these mediators and the services that need to provide these options. And the lack of recognition becomes in itself a barrier, so that women will not get the access to the comprehensive care that they need, or to the potential posterior reparations. We need to be aware of the fact that a cultural intermediator, and women in particular, both the mediators themselves as women, but women that work in healthcare, women that work with communities, with the families, that work that is being done on the field, and sometimes it's just being ignored, but it's there. And talking about this comprehensive care, we also need to recognize, because we have not yet done that, and because of that lack of recognition, there's not a common protocol to act in every single autonomous community. We have different ones, and each autonomous community has its own. Like Catalonia, Navarre, the Basque country, they have these protocols, but they are not the same, they're not equal. So survivors of FGM in Castilla y León will not have access to the same services and same resources that a survivor of the same gender-based violence in Catalonia might have. And we need this at a state level to guarantee that the assistance and the healthcare will reach all women in a similar fashion. And also to understand comprehensive assistance as a possibility to cooperate through the different resources to offer what these survivors need, by mixing the different professionals for different units, and not only thinking about healthcare per se, and healthcare centers, but also take into consideration other aspects of the care that the survivors might need, including sex education, psychological services, and to offer all of these options through specific guidelines and specific protocols that will offer the same kind of services, including social workers, among others, because it's fundamental if you think about it. Just as Françoise mentioned before, in the Istanbul Convention, these crisis centers, specialized tertiary centers, are recognized as the places that will recognize the gender-based violence and offer specific care for the survivors and the potential victims. And this is not only just there, but it's also included in the CSE, yes is yes, only yes is yes, law, the act approved recently in the state of Spain. And although it's mentioned there, what we are seeing is that these crisis centers have not yet been guaranteed as a specialized tertiary center that includes, among others, the violence acts of female genital mutilation, something that we know exists, but our network is fighting to make sure that it will be included as the element of these crisis centers, because so far the crisis centers are mainly focused on sexual abuse and sexual violence. We consider this a gender-based violence that should be also included in these crisis centers and should have professionals trained for this specific situation with their own resources. For all of these, we believe that we've moved forward thanks to this comprehensive law, but we need to give it a bit more shape. We need to make sure that things that are in the paper should be properly applied in the reality. Otherwise, we cannot yet see how all the guarantees included in this act should be applied to women and girls that are survivors of female genital mutilation. And taking all of this into consideration when we're talking about the different certifications and the different elements of this act and how the FGM is included as a type of gender-based violence and sexual violence, women that have survived this practice should have the right to obtain the certification, a certification that will make it easier for survivors to have access to resources in terms of employment or financial resources or access to an independent housing option. So what we have seen when we have been talking about independence and to emancipation, we're talking about how the survivors, these women, have suffered this FGM, which is important, and we try to empower them from there. But we still have a lot to do, and we need to know how we can do this, what are the protocols going to look like, and also we will be needing a specific medical certification. We will have specific entities where we can refer women to do this process. Are we going to have an intercultural part of the process? So all of this helps us to promote this comprehensive care. And just to conclude here, I would like also to talk about a national level protocol to be applied at all levels that should include all the different resources that have to do with the care of survivors, women and girls survivors of female genital mutilation, including what healthcare workers do, social workers, because it's important to include all of these roles by creating a protocol-based guideline. Otherwise, the female genital mutilation as another type and one of the types of gender-based violence will have a way of affecting the lives of women in many ways, not only having to do with the health issues, but in many other ways that have also to be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, Sarahi, por traernos las demandas y las necesidades.
Thank you for talking about the real needs that women have. Now we're going to open a Q&A session. We have also received the questions from people online, but I don't know whether you have in the room something to say. I see raised hands here. Another one here. So yeah, we will answer your questions. Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the speakers, but this is just a reflection. I want to thank this roundtable, this session, for having talked about racism that happens at the same time of male control. Sometimes we speak about African men, but we also have to take into account European men, Spanish men, and also women, because this machismo, this male chauvinism is a system that needs to be tackled from the institutions, taking this feminine perspective into account, a perspective which is also anti-racist, because obstacles sometimes are found in the institutions, in practical terms. That's why institutional violence is a reality, and we are not providing or given the necessary importance to mutilation, to female genital mutilation. So it is important to know the barriers that we encounter when we have to access the institutions. Racism is present in a cross-sectional way together with other oppression systems.
Hola, muy buenos días.
Good morning.
Me llamo Diara Diarra.
My name is Diara Diarra. I'm from Mali, but I live in Catalonia.
Sí, cuando hablo y siento
Yes, I speak Catalan too, I have to say. Don't blame me, because I have been living in Catalonia for more than 30 years. Thank you very much. The session of today has been very important, and I want to thank the organization for having the possibility to have this international conference on female genital mutilation. I am a victim of female genital mutilation. I've been present in many campaigns in Catalonia with different spaces, different acts and events, and I am here today in Madrid, but tomorrow I will be back in Barcelona. I want to ask the table or the three of you who are here today on the stage something about mutilation, because we are speaking about rights of women, and we are speaking about the freedom, about women's freedom who have survived female genital mutilation. First, I want to speak about the European law. I could say European law because this law is for people who live in Europe, but still, since we come from outside, from other countries, we are not contemplated in the legislation. And I don't know whether the European law can be opened up and talk about migration and about the women who live or have lived or experienced the female genital mutilation. Because I think that female genital mutilation is not acknowledged in the law. Of course it is mentioned, but they are not really working on it. And this is a work that we've been doing for the last few years among professional people. But what happens with the victims of female genital mutilation? The work is not ready, it's not here yet. Not just because of our sisters and women. This is something that affects us even when we travel, when we go to a hospital, to a healthcare center. You are obliged to sign a protocol, and sometimes, or many times, you also have to sign a protocol that you, in this precise moment, are nervous because you want to go to your country. You travel with a girl, you have to prepare the trip, and you have many things in your head. And if you have to sign something specific at the moment, I will have problems, because I really need to understand what it is written in the paper, and then I have to be ready and have the strength enough, have to be brave enough once in my country to explain what is the protocol about. And this is what we have to work on. We mentioned empowerment of African women and so on. We mentioned about the empowerment of survival, people who have survived mutilation, to have more power and to have more control. But we who have lived and experienced this practice have to tell our sisters and brothers, I have experienced this practice, I have suffered a lot, but let's stop that, because otherwise we cannot travel to our countries, and this is something that we have to take into account. But this is the role of ourselves, who we women experience this practice, we who are victims, have to talk about what has happened to us. And we have to be supported by the public institutions, so that public institutions can finance and hire the necessary resources so that we can speak up. Otherwise, female genital mutilation is going to be a reality, and it's not going to end. Our sisters rely on us, they trust us, and they believe that community mediation is something that we need and something that we have to encourage. And for that to be a reality, we don't need a mediator for just 5 hours or 10 hours a week. 5 hours is okay, but what happens the rest of the time? We cannot continue with female genital mutilation. Of course, protocols are okay, legislation is okay, but we need more strength, we need more awareness so that the community itself says, stop, let's stop with this practice, let's cancel it, because we are damaging the health of our girls and the health of our mothers, and we are vulnerating and violating their human rights and the rights as women. And this is something that has to come up from the community, but we need more work for that. Protocols are okay, they can help, but we lack awareness. And this is in our hands. This is in our hands as women that we have lived a female genital mutilation, but we need support. So I ask you about the budget, about the annual budget, the year budget, that it is going to be for women who have suffered female genital mutilation for themselves. What is the budget allocated for us? Then I think that to have data of women or girls that are going to be mutilated this year, this data is very difficult because we're working here in our community, in our country. We don't know what is going to happen. You won't have any official data because there are girls living in villages. They don't have birth certificates. They don't know anything. So you won't have access to data in my countries, in other countries, in African countries, especially about girls who were born or born in very remote areas. They don't have access to a doctor, they don't have birth certificates, so it is impossible for you to have the data. We won't have them. Of course we have done a lot of things, but there is a long way to go. Altogether. And I think that we can make it. I mean, altogether we can make it, but we lack a lot of work. Good morning. Can you listen? Can you hear me? I want to thank all the entities that have organized these events and also the speakers, but I have like a couple of questions. One is, into what extent policies, in this case the directive or the agreement itself, includes the international cooperation aspect. We know that in the end, as the person who has made the question said, at the level of the international cooperation, we can make or organize projects in the communities that are affected by this issue. In theory, all the countries have a budget for international cooperation aspects, and we see that these type of actions and activity, and I am from Colombia, by the way. Colombia is one of the countries where we suffer this practice in indigenous communities. These indigenous communities that are very far away from cities and institutions and so on, and if the international cooperation does not get to these communities, they don't have any type of health services. I know that France has actions in France, but I don't know what happens from a European point of view or at the level of policies or up to what extent these type of activities are taking place. My second question has to do with responsibilities or accountability. I'd like to know whether the budget allocated for that is really having an impact on the communities, not just in Spain, especially if we talk about prevention.
Bueno, yo me quería referir a la
I wanted to talk about the importance of intercultural mediation, which I think is very important. You mentioned that this is not just about a single task related to translation or linguistic communication. Mediation is more than communication. It has to do with being a bridge between two cultures or between the different cultures that are taking place to allow the access to a population without any rights, and to the fact that now they are in Spain and have access to different types of services. So I think this contribution about the role of mediators was very important. And I have a question that is quite controversial, because mediation is a mediation between different cultures or radically different cultures. Can we try to have an intercultural mediation with a specific culture, which is the patriarchy, the dominant culture, male chauvinistic culture trying to control women and blame them? And this culture tries to control us and to diminish our rights. Is it possible a mediation among different cultures when we have a culture demanding rights and demanding the cancellation of gender violence? So maybe we can use mediation, or maybe we can use other means. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your questions. But I have to mention some questions asked online. I don't know whether Françoise is connected, because there are some questions about the role of Grevio and the Istanbul Convention. And there are also questions related to how do you think actions need to look like when we move forward to the elimination or removal of this type of violence. And there are other comments related to the importance of networking for the prevention and for working with men and women. So maybe Sarahi can talk about some networking examples. Also, the importance of psychological attention of women who have survived the experience of mutilation, which is also related to the impact that female genital mutilation has on the comprehensive health of women. It's not just the fact of it, but how it affects their life. I don't know whether Françoise is connected, but I want to ask her about the surgical, the design vagina, which is more and more demanding and implemented in Europe, and about how we can monitor the look upon refugee women, which is also related to the directive, and also some information about the Grevio. And I don't know whether you know that the Grevio is going to come to Spain this year to evaluate Spain specifically, and we think that it is very important that we can take this into account. One of the problems for migrant women is to access to protection. So the question is what we are doing in Spain and what we are doing specifically in the Grevio. I think that this is more or less the questions that we have.
Well, a lot has been said. I don't know if I've been able to take notes of all the questions, but personally, I would like to highlight the role of the European Union as an organism, as an institution. The idea I mentioned is in itself a contradiction. A contradiction because all of the different treaties that it generates, and the ones specifically targeted towards the gender-based violence, they tend to talk about the status of the regulation, and independently of the administrative status, they will attend to the situation. But we know structural racism do exist, and because it exists, it affects due to a series of different legal frameworks. But not only that, there are some access barriers to be taken into consideration. And we need to keep on working on insisting in this area and to explain it and to talk about it, explaining the European Pact on Migration and how it affects the way in which we can go through an asylum seeking process and how gender plays a role there, how female genital mutilation can be or not an element in that process, because you are migrating and you are doing it for a reason. But if you don't get that access, what would happen then? Because the care that should be provided is not accurately provided because it's not taking that aspect into account. How the civil society has a role to play as well. We should not just remain silent when there are different rules that might be approved, and also the work that we offer from a community perspective. I would like to offer you an answer about the amount of money that we have. I have no idea, honestly. I wish we could have more resources to empower and to strengthen the role of the women that are working in the association or outside the associations created by and for migrant female survivors, like the one that you direct, the ALA or the Association by Fatoumata, and the different associations that are out there that are working, that are doing a lot, that people are not seeing what they're doing, but they are transforming families, society, and women. And for that, we want to keep on working in that direction, how relevant it is in the communities to keep on working to prevent and eradicate female genital mutilation. And I forgot the rest, so I'm finishing my response here. To give you an answer, and starting by the end of the list of questions, how do we do the mediation? As a process to accompany individually in the reparation and recuperation processes. From my own experience working in these specialized services, I think we need to start in centers where different professionals work together, because working with mediators for me has been incredibly interesting. Lawyers also play a part in preventing institutional violence, the male predominant gaze that we can perceive in these areas, and how we can reduce that by just accompanying, by being there supporting these women through these processes. Sometimes when we talk about protection, sometimes the most difficult thing we can do is to protect against institutional violence, specifically when there is a component not only of gender, but also of those that you can find racism in institutions. People have to be held accountable. We have to explain the laws that are there, the resources that we have and we're using, and accountability is fundamental. We need to have enough resources. So every year we need this amount of money, and we need to make sure that this amount is updated every set of years. I know there's a specific plan for the European Union for the protection of democracy and human rights in other countries that are not part of the European Union, but I'm pretty sure that it's less than the amount of money the European Union is offering to the protection of the European frontiers to prevent non-Europeans to come into their European territory. But in the different cooperation actions, there are some lines in the European Union projects that are promoting more and more projects with the aim to offer the required resources on the ground. As our colleague mentioned, it makes absolutely no sense to create all the actions here and expect that we can change things there to solve an issue where we don't even have enough context. So the only way to do this is by accompanying, to be part of the process. And to conclude, I would like to highlight again the idea that, for me, to be aware of the situation is fundamental. We will not change any type of gender-based violence if we are not aware of that they do exist. So that's the beginning and the end of the story for me. Thank you very much. Because we are running out of time and Françoise is here with us.
Unas cuantas palabras.
So,
Primero sobre la...
what can I say? First, regarding international cooperation. In the Council of Europe, we work in international cooperation, but between the different member states in Europe. And there are some programs that have to do with gender-based violence and violence against women. But we do not work with non-member countries. One of the things that I wanted to mention in my presentation is that the Istanbul Convention is an open convention. Any country, whether they are members or not of the Council of Europe, can join the convention and ratify it and be part of the assessment process. There are some non-members countries, non-European countries that are interested in joining, and we hope African states and countries from LATAM will ratify the convention as well. Another element regarding accountability that will allow me to talk about our assessment, the assessment done by the GREVIO. The GREVIO is the Group of Experts on Action Against Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. Is the specific committee that assesses the application of the convention in the states that have ratified it. And as has been mentioned, we have already had at least one round of assessment in all the different members that have ratified. In Spain, the evaluation took place in 2020, and it was published in 2020, in fact. And in the report that is available, you can find a lot of information, and if they ask you about asylum seekers and refugees and whether the female genital mutilation is being taken into consideration, there are a lot of considerations included in the report for Spain. Now, the GREVIO is starting now the second round of evaluation. And this assessment has been considered that it will not be a full-on assessment of all the dispositions, of all the provisions, but it will be a thematic assessment, and the theme here is trust, whether the victims trust the system. So we will assess 19 provisions of this convention, and we have not included those specific targeting asylum, the 60 and 61 articles in the convention, but the GREVIO have decided that there should be an interest on prevention and protection, and for that we will assess these areas in the specific, the difficulties and the challenges facing different groups of women, including refugees and migrant women and asylum seekers as well. So although they are not part of the main topic, they will be included and their difficulties will be assessed as well in this second round of reports. And to conclude, I also wanted to mention, just as one of the moderators mentioned, the visit of GREVIO to Spain will take place by the end of February, and after that the GREVIO will prepare that second assessment report on Spain, and if everything works as it should be published by November, December of 2024. And then there will be another assessment to see the practical application of the convention. Is in many ways a tool of accountability. It's a kind of tool to assess the accountability. I hope I've been able to give an answer to some of the questions, but if you have more, I'm here for you. I can send you an email with all the answers you might need to all the questions you might have.
Muchas gracias, Françoise. Bueno, nos hemos alargado.
Thank you, Françoise. We've taken a bit more time than we should, but we knew it was important to have time for this dialogue. And I just want to thank all of the different participants. Thank you to all the colleagues that have been here with me in this round table and the colleagues from UNAF. And now we have a coffee break, and we hope you will enjoy. We have a colleague that has a catering company, and we hope you enjoy it. So if you want a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, we'll have it. We should be back from the break at 12:30. I don't know if we can get a few more minutes to do some networking with the coffee.